Gacha monetization is predatory at best, if not outright evil, and the companies which make these games range from problematic to incredibly anti-consumer. So why would anyone ever play a gacha game? Up until a few years ago, I would have never considered giving them a try. After all, there are so many other games to play, ones where you pay a reasonable price up front and then play to your heart's content. My impression was that gachas were low-quality cash grabs which preyed on people who were essentially gambling addicts and cost exponentially more than any game ever should. And to be clear, to this day I still dislike gacha monetization. Yet, I now count a couple of gachas amongst my favorite games of the last few years. Have I gone mad? Or, just maybe, might some gacha developers have struck a balance which makes the whole idea just about acceptable? And could there even be some hidden upsides to these games that people who have carefully avoided them are unaware of? Let's talk about it. Gacha games are often talked about as if they are a genre, but this is misleading. Gacha is a monetization method. When you want to get a new item in the game, you don't buy it directly. Instead, you spend in-game currency to roll some virtual dice. For each roll, there's a percentage chance that you'll get what you wanted, or a myriad of other consolation prizes which you could get instead. Any type of game imaginable could potentially use this concept as a way to make money. For example, FIFA Ultimate Team is, essentially, a very predatory gacha game. At its core, this is, essentially, gambling. The terms gacha players use are even copied from the gambling industry. For example, each roll of those virtual dice is commonly called a pull, a reference to pulling a lever on a slot machine. While I would argue that simplifying it to this degree robs the discussion of a lot of important nuance, before we get into the details of why I think gachas are less problematic than their reputation implies, it's important to address the most fundamental question: why the heck would anyone accept this in the first place? First, while I've heard that older gachas focused almost entirely on the monetization and the game was mostly just an excuse for people to gamble, modern gachas have come a long way from those origins. Gacha developers earned more than enough money to fund development of a typical AAA game, and instead of building yet another gambling simulator with a bit of a game bolted on top, some decided to try making something they could be proud of. While these games are still a step or two behind the absolute best of the best, and they still use many of the problematic practices and dark patterns which gachas are rightfully vilified for, anyone who hasn't given them a chance may find themselves shocked at their level of depth and polish. There are, of course, some players who are truly addicted to the gacha and think of the game as just a chore they have to get through so they can spend their pulls. When it comes to modern gachas, these people are a small minority. Second, while many would clutch their pearls at hearing that I've spent a few £100s on a single gacha game, I would argue that's a very short-sighted way of looking at spending on entertainment or pleasure. When trying to gauge the value for money that you're getting from a game, the total price is far less important than the amount spent per hour of enjoyment. For AAA games, some that I've been pretty satisfied with are Jedi Fallen Order, God of War, and Spider-Man. I bought all three of those at full price and played them for a little over 50 hours each. That works out around £1.40 per hour. I personally see that as a reasonable amount. I'd say I got my money's worth, and I don't feel compelled to go back and replay them for the sake of getting more bang for my buck, even though I did enjoy them. There are a small handful of AAA games which I absolutely fell in love with and played for 10 times as long, Horizon Zero Dawn and Red Dead Redemption chief amongst them, but since I don't expect every game to be a favorite, they feel a little beside the point, and the value for money I got there feels more like an outlier than a level I should demand from other games. For indie games, the cost per hour is noticeably higher. Stray, for example, cost £20 and I completed it in 7 hours, so that would be £2.85 per hour. Or Never, my partner bought that for £15 and completed it in 5 hours, so £3 per hour, yet he considers it a favourite and money well spent. Personally, I'm happy to pay that premium to support smaller teams. Cost per hour is an imperfect measurement, and other factors can affect what you feel is a good deal for any given thing. For every type of game, there will be a point at which you feel comfortable. The question is where that line exists for you. I have a much stricter bar for what I'd be comfortable spending on gachas compared to other games. I'd consider maybe 25p per hour or something like that, but I've never even come close to half that. That gacha game I've spent a few £100s on, I played it for several hundred hours before I spent a penny and loved every minute of it. And I've played it for over 5,000 hours in total. My spending on that game comes out as less than 10p per hour, well below the limit that I'd feel okay with for this type of game. In some ways, it's far better value for money than many other games I've spent on. All games exist to make money, especially the ones made by companies rather than individuals. Gamers continue to buy them anyway because they get a good experience experience out of it. Gachas are just a different flavor of the same thing. And that's comparing within gaming, a notoriously cost-effective hobby. People spend exponentially more on even simple things like a daily cup of coffee, and yet people don't go around shaming them. And that brings us to the third point. Why would someone spend thousands of hours playing a gacha game? The only ones I'd personally consider playing are those which aspire to AAA standards. They can be worth your time if they hit the spot for you, and they tend to have a scope far beyond anything that the games they aim to compete with can manage. For example, one type of gameplay I can happily get lost in for hours at a time is open world exploration, and I have yet to see a non-gacha come close to the likes of Genshin Impact. Genshin started off with a huge world packed with things to do. Even in the beginning, it was of similar scale to Breath of the Wild, and they have steadily released new regions over time, to the point where the original map looks tiny when compared to all the expansions that we've been given so far. And that's just the main world map. There are also 4 extra bonus regions separate from the main open world, which are each the size of a decent exploration game in their own right. And of course, there's much more to come. These expansions are not forgettable, low-quality slop. The environment design in Genshin is legitimately breathtaking. Each region is packed with things to discover and innovative gameplay ideas which are at once unique to that region and iterations on what worked previously, and the gameplay loops and traversal methods have been getting better and better with every passing update. The wait between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom was 6 years. Genshin essentially releases a DLC every few months and a new entire sequel every year. It should be obvious why people who enjoy the game feel like they're getting a good deal overall. The same principle applies to the other aspects of these games too. They're often a little less polished than you'd expect from a seasoned AAA developer, especially at the start, but they learn from their mistakes and it's in their interest to improve over time. I started playing these games because the gameplay looked like it would fit my preferences, and I kept playing because they did a fantastic job. The fact that they've improved since then and even started to produce story quests which are up there with the rest of gaming has just been icing on the cake. What I get out of this as a consumer is a game that I enjoy just as much as any alternative, with a level of breadth and depth that any other games can only dream of at a price point I have complete control over. But, of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I still have strong reservations about the monetization in these games, however, and I feel that it's vital to go into it with a clear understanding of its flaws. Interestingly, some of the worst excesses which used to be associated with gacha games legitimately do not apply to the games which I'm talking about here. It seems that the companies behind them have realized that they can still make ludicrous amounts of money even if they tone down things and make them at least a little less adversarial towards their customers. Note that I would not consider these changes to be green flags which highlight a game with good monetization practices. They're just removing some of the worst red flags instead. The most important is the introduction of pity systems. Gacha games with a pity system count how many pulls you have made and include a guarantee that after a certain number of pulls, they will take pity on you and give you the rare item you're trying to get no matter what the dice roll says. Compare this to the quintessential real-world gacha, booster packs of Pokemon cards. Let's say you're hoping to get an ultra-rare card which is only available in 1 in 16 packs. Since each pack's contents are completely random, you might get an ultra-rare in your first pack, or you might have an unlucky streak and open hundreds of packs before you get an ultra-rare card. And trying to get one specific ultra-rare card is utterly futile. A pity system removes this open-ended unpredictability. It provides an absolute maximum cost for each item, and the gambling aspect becomes a question of whether you get it early or whether you have to wait for the guarantee. Of course, the maximum cost for any given item is ludicrously high when looked at in isolation. It's important to take that step back and evaluate your enjoyment of the game as a whole and err on the side of not spending unless you feel that the game has given you great value for that money. A pity system is essential for us to be able to make any informed decisions at all. Another common criticism of gachas is that they are pay to play and that you often reach points in the game where you cannot continue without pulling certain items. This is simply not the case in the gachas which I have played, because the gacha system is not directly connected to the gameplay loop. You will likely see people claim that it is to some extent, for example when some endgame content is significantly easier if you have certain characters, or when characters have abilities which make exploration smoother, but the core content of the game is not locked behind these things. The last vestige of this aspect of older gachas which remains present in the newer games is the stamina system. Stamina throttles how often you can redeem the rewards from certain repeatable fights, rewards which you need to make your characters more powerful. This serves as a rate limit which prevents you from leveling your account quickly in favor of slower and more steady improvement over a longer period of time. While you can pay some real-world money to buy some extra stamina, the games have a hard limit on how many times you can do this per day, so even for those who do buy them, the difference it makes to account progression is small. They also set the price stupidly high to the point that pretty much nobody uses this option. I know many people who play these games from start to finish without spending a thing. They still have a great time. This is part of why gachas have a reputation for being exceptionally grindy. In the past, this was how they encouraged people to spend after all. Thankfully, while modern gachas do have some level of grindiness when it comes to building characters, it's separate from the actual gameplay loop and you don't have to engage with it if you don't want to. Another common criticism is that gachas are inherently pay to win. In the ones I play, there is no competition because there is no PvP in the game at all. Some players do create some forms of competition amongst themselves, competing with each other via speedrunning or trying to create the most powerful builds for their characters, but that's all entirely optional and takes place outside of the game itself. Many players do wish for PvP gameplay to be added despite the minefield that it would introduce, but personally, I would prefer to keep these games single player with optional co-op. Any PvP mode would require a lot of careful balancing for it to be even vaguely acceptable, and I'm not sure I would trust any of the developers to be able to pull that off. Older gachas also have a reputation for including absurd difficulty spikes, which effectively force players to pull for certain stronger characters, which counter the difficulty spike in order to continue playing. Pay to play in all but name. In the gachas I've played, the vast majority of the game is very much on the easy side and can be completed even with the basic characters you're given for free at the start of the game. The actual game is not tied to any form of difficulty, which requires you to use the gacha system at all. The only place where difficulty does come into play is the optional endgame content. The endgame is intended for dedicated players, and it does become a lot easier if you pull for things which make your account more powerful, but despite that, it's possible in the games I enjoy for even free-to-play account to reach a level where it's able to complete the endgame. In a sense, the gachas I've played have achieved a balance where the game is fun and accessible for people who don't spend at all, while also being rewarding for people who do want to spend. I've seen people argue in favor of indie games introducing a pay-what-you-want system so that people who have a lot of cash to spare are able to pay extra to support the game for those who are less fortunate than they are. If you look past the manipulative and unethical aspects which gacha systems introduce, they do, in practice, provide a system which emulates this kind of behavior. This is very much not the goal of gacha monetization, but it is an interesting benefit which emerges from the way the system is designed. One final benefit of how gachas are structured is that if you find one which you enjoy, you have something which can be a steady and comfortable source of entertainment for a long time. No matter how much I've loved any of those AAA games in the past, their shelf life is comparatively short. While the variety you gain from having to move on to the next game is valuable, the gacha update cycle brings a steady stream of new things to experience as well, so it's not as night and day as you might assume. Personally, I like having both. I still play those one-and-done games which provide a unique experience at the same time as having a couple of long-term games on the side. My content on YouTube is currently focused on the latter just because there's a lot to say about them, but I will be spreading out to other games as well, and maybe other forms of storytelling too, once I can find the time. In a world where everything is changing, and often for the worse, having something you can consistently come back to can be absolute gold. There are, of course, many little things in these games which are manipulative and are carefully designed to nudge you towards feeling comfortable with spending money. They introduce the gacha mechanic early on, provide free currency for players to spend, and slowly work towards making people feel used to using the gacha system before asking them to spend any money. Then, when they run out of free-to-play currency, they're much more likely to spend because they're already acclimatized to the system. To some extent, this is less of an issue for the gachas I've played. The sheer volume of content available in games like Genshin means that it takes literal months of playing for many hours per day before you run out of the free-to-play currency, and since the game is consistently releasing new content, you still get a steady stream over time. Also, the gacha system is filled with flashy and exciting animations intended to give you a dopamine rush, and the characters you pull for are designed to be as appealing as possible. This is often via the physical attractiveness of their design, but even more so via their characterization, through relatable stories which make you care for them on a deeper level. This is both good and bad. On the one hand, good stories about lovable characters are one of the main things people are looking for when they play any story-based games, so this is one place where the interests of the developers and the players are actually aligned. On the other, the intention of the devs is slightly warped. Their goal is to make characters you want to pull for. Even if they want to tell a compelling story along the way, there will forever be a slight misalignment here. One of the most common ways this misalignment manifests is through power creep. As I mentioned earlier, this is not an issue for the 99% of the game that most players will spend their entire time on, and is only really relevant to the endgame. But for those who do get into the game's harder content, Powercreep is a slow decay eating away at the viability of the old favorites. Often, the devs make each new character a little more powerful than the last, so that people who do pull for them get an exciting experience with their new toy. If they want the endgame to remain challenging, a natural consequence of making characters more powerful is that they need to make the enemies stronger too. And if the enemies get stronger, eventually the older characters will no longer be able to compete. The slow ambient power creep will have made them obsolete. There are solutions to this, role diversification for example, or game design which leans more towards player skill than raw power, but so far all the games I've played have fallen prey to this, perhaps aside from Wuthering Waves. There are also places where the gacha approach clashes with the expectations and norms that people build up when playing other games. Completionism, for example. Many people find joy and accomplishment in reaching 100% in every game they play, experiencing everything it has to offer and collecting platinum medals on their accounts. Gachas are both good and bad for this. In the part of the gacha, which is a game, there are loads of ways to scratch that itch. Achievements, exploration, quests, collectibles, endgame, all of which can be fun to do because it's part of the gameplay loop itself. However, if you start feeling completionist towards the items you get from the gacha, you're in for a bad time. Take Genshin, for example. That game provides roughly enough free-to-play currency to guarantee that you get at least half of the rare characters, though, of course, if you get lucky, you'll get more than that. If you want to get all of them, you'll need to pay. This is totally unnecessary, but some people do want to complete the set. And where this gets really bad is that there's a very high ceiling to it. If someone wants to complete the characters they get through the gacha system, they might feel compelled to pull for the maximum possible strength, which would mean pulling 7 copies of the character and 5 copies of their weapon. Enough currency that it would cost hundreds or even thousands every single time. For someone wealthy, I guess that's not an issue, but for someone else, that would be really unsustainable. If you have completionist tendencies, I definitely say be cautious about it, and the moment you start feeling that way towards the gacha items, it's time to stop. I also feel that the social pressure in these games is a little bit toxic at times, especially from the most hardcore subset of the community. For anyone who does see the endgame as competition, there's pressure to pull for the strongest characters just to keep up, for example. There's also an expectation from some that people who really like a specific character, they'll max them out by pulling for copies and for their weapon, and some actually look down on those who don't. Those people are easily ignored, but a more insidious type of social pressure comes from following content creators. Most content about the game is made by extremely dedicated players, and there's a lot of pressure on CCs to cover everything about the latest update the moment it comes out. People who follow them often feel compelled to keep up too, so that they can take part in the discussion. Personally, I avoid this. I take my time with the updates and focus on enjoying the journey. If I'm not in the mood, I'll save the new content for later. And this approach flows into my content too. For example, many people post guides about new characters the moment they're released. Instead, I wait until an old character returns before considering covering them. This means I get the time and space to experience a character's story long before I make any content about them, and I can look at them from a much more holistic perspective. Those videos naturally get fewer views because they're not focusing on the new hot topic, but I enjoy creating them far more, so that's the approach I prefer. Social pressure in gacha games can be a problem, but as long as you're aware of it, you can make sure to avoid it. Those are the bad parts, but it gets worse. Gachas are designed to abuse psychological tricks that encourage the behavior they want. To use the technical terms, the gacha mechanic is operant conditioning, which uses a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. In plain English, they aim to condition you to follow the behavior they want by providing inconsistent rewards. The inconsistency of these rewards makes them far more potent as a motivating force than any other approach. This is, sadly, everywhere in the modern world. It's the fundamental force behind social media addiction. Every time you post something, you know you might get a reward in the form of dopamine when someone else interacts with what you said. So much of the world is gamified these days, and this technique is key to keeping people hooked. Which leads to another dirty psychological trick they pull, normalisation. I see this in gachas in 2 ways. First, they want to get you to accept the valuation they place on the in-game currency they sell. To do this, they give you some, even a lot, of that currency. When they tell you that the currency you just received is worth a certain amount of money, you're far more likely to accept that valuation subconsciously. And once you start to accept it, you're much more likely to feel comfortable buying more. And second, they want to get you comfortable with spending. They offer cheaper monthly passes or premium rewards from a battle pass which provide good value for money compared to the other options. It's only a small amount, so why not? Then once you've bought in once, it's a lot easier for them to upsell you to buy more. They also make constant use of artificial scarcity. Each gacha banner is only available for a limited period of time, usually just a few weeks. Banners do rerun eventually, but nobody knows how long you'll have to wait until they return. Some banners return after just a couple of months, but some may take years. This is designed to trigger the fear of missing out, because if you do want a certain character, maybe because you love their story or just find their gameplay fun, then there's a lot of psychological pressure to make sure you get them. When someone doesn't have quite enough currency to get the thing they want, they may feel compelled to spend just enough to reach that pity and make sure they get that reward. And, of course, it's also important to mention the obfuscation these games use to disconnect players from the value of the currency they've bought. In-game gacha currencies use conversion rates which are designed to be unintuitive. For example, in several of the ones I've played, it costs 160 of the premium currency to buy a single pull. We live in a world where most people's mental maths is built upon base 10, and even those who are comfortable with running conversions in their head will still experience a slight disconnect there. And worse, they sell an in-game currency in awkward amounts, which adds another layer of obfuscation between the money the player spends and the pulls they're intending to buy. Thankfully, this is something that several governments are starting to crack down on. As the most prominent gacha, Genshin has recently been forced by the US government to display cash values to everything in the gacha system, which does a great job of pulling back the veil they use to obfuscate how much money they're trying to persuade you to spend. This is a positive step forwards, and I hope that governments worldwide start to follow suit. All of those tactics are, of course, extremely dystopian. If you hear all that and decide to never touch a gacha game in your life, then I wholeheartedly support your decision. If you do find one where the game part looks like it would be utterly compelling to you, it's vital to be aware of these tactics and to regularly take conscious step back so you can reconsider from an objective perspective. Personally, I start completely free to play, and if I ever want to buy something in the game, I pause and look at how much I've enjoyed the game in the past and think through what price per hour of enjoyment I'd feel comfortable with. If I've spent 100 hours enjoying a game, then maybe I'll consider spending £5 or £10 or even up to 20 if it's been a dream to play. It helps that I'm always conscious of the tactics they use, since anytime I start to feel that fear of missing out, it just makes me angry that they're trying to manipulate me and I'm less likely to spend. It's also important to acknowledge that it's easy to fall victim to sunk cost fallacy. People spend a lot on these games and often feel like they have to carry on because all of that would be gone if they give up. By taking that time to assess and tying your level of spending to the entertainment you've already received and the price point that you're comfortable with for gachas in general, it becomes far easier to decide to stop. It's important to know when to quit. Games are supposed to be fun, and the moment it becomes anything less than a joy to you, you should stop playing and find something else to invest your time and money into. You can make more money, but you can't make more time. And for those people who play gachas for the gacha first and find it frustrating when the game gets in the way, that's really not healthy, and I hope you find your way to a better place. Gacha monetization is incredibly predatory, and the psychological techniques they use to manipulate their players are a valid reason to avoid them entirely. Governments across the world are starting to take notice and are beginning to apply more stringent regulations which curtail the most problematic practices, and I think everyone who enjoys a gacha game should cheer them on. The developers have started to move away from their toxic origins, and some of the modern gachas are fantastic games in their own right. I'll always wish they would exist without the gacha model bolted on, but personally I'm able to enjoy these games while still retaining control over the value I place on my time and money. If I ever feel like either is not being respected, I'm out. You might still think this is a post-rationalization someone makes after deciding to spend their money, but I'm the kind of person who decides they want something and then doesn't buy it unless I still want the same thing several months later. If you struggle with that kind of impulse control, then maybe gachas aren't for you. If you don't, then there might be some fantastic games out there which you can fall in love with. Until next time!